this was a project with a small family-owned business, small in numbers, less than 20 employees, and revenue of about 16 million. They had a national presence that during COVID extended and expanded to international, because a lot of the work they did was through Zoom. But then what happened was that the employees were burning out because they were then available 24/7, to the extent that they even had to use some of their team who were isolating for COVID in Europe to bridge the gap with their clients in Australia. And what was really happening was that employees were burning out and and the managers were getting frustrated because employees were burning out and complaining and quitting. There was a lot of turnover. So they brought me in to quote unquote create harmony. That was the language that was used. We want you to fix this, decrease turnover, get everyone united and functioning as a team. And the structure was everybody was reporting to everybody. I mean, they really to the owner, excuse me. And just below the owner are two 20-year veterans of work experience. And they have been both assured that when this 80-year-old business owner retires, they will take over the business. That was, and as far as I know, still is the plan. The West Coast manager embraced OD thoroughly, very enthusiastically, sought feedback, met with me regularly. In addition to the teamwork, I was working individually with the two managers. And the East Coast manager, or I was supposed to work with both, the East Coast manager said directly, this was a quote, "I know I'm a bad manager, and quite frankly, I don't care." So that's the setup. Are there any questions about the setup?
I have a question. So 16 million in revenue, but like how many employees and what type of work? Because I mean, if it's like a fast food restaurant, you know, you're always going to have a lot of turnover there, but just the type of work, I guess you could speak a little bit to that.
Mm-hmm. Less than 20 employees and entertainment industry.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Scott.
How was the performance of the East Coast versus the West Coast?
Thank you. So both managers were extraordinarily high performing, and they did have a difference in some clients wanting to work specifically with West Coast manager and some clients wanting to work specifically with East Coast manager. And those didn't really mix. In other words, once someone declared which manager they wanted to work with, they created a very tight client manager relationship, and they generally wanted to work with their chosen manager. So the business revenue depended on the client that they had, and it just so happens that in Los Angeles there's more entertainment industry work. So a lot more happened on the West Coast, but they're both high performing. And there's a lot more to that story, but that's as much as I'll say at the moment. Any other questions just about the setup? Oh, what did the owner envision? Well, he's a military guy and wanted everything to run like military clockwork.
Do you want to read your questions, Marcy? I put your case in the chat, and I think you had 3 questions for them.
Oh, great. I'm so glad. Yes. What would you do? What would you do when a manager does not want to be coached, specifically that East Coast manager? When the hiring client wants you to wave a magic wand to fix everything and is resistant to change? What do you do? And what do you do working with a family-owned business that has lots of history and complex relationship and few, I would say almost at the beginning of the project, almost no boundaries? Let's see, it looks like there was another message here, but I'm missing it.
It was just to assist. Stacy and I both put it in as new members were joining.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the plan right now is that we're going to break up into breakout rooms, I think randomly.
Yep.
Answer those 3 questions. You have what, 15 to 10, how much time?
15.
15 minutes. Play with it, have fun, brainstorm away, and then we'll come back and we'll debrief. So who would like to go first? Michael, you were on the verge of saying the most important thing. Can we hear what you were going to say in your group?
Oh, we were, talking about, the family culture. And we were talking about that East Coast manager. I was kind of curious to find out what his history with the family was, to kind of put it in context. We hadn't got, obviously we didn't get a lot of detail or, the backstory. So I was kind of trying to get the backstory or what those relationships actually were. Was he someone's son-in-law, brother-in-law, cousin? I don't know. And whatever's going on. I mean, that's all that kind of juicy stuff that we're just guessing about.
Yes. Yeah. How about another group? What were your initial conversation points?
I think in our group, we kind of started out thinking we have to ask more questions to better understand the situation.
Yeah.
And that evolved into different kinds of questions we might ask, but it also raised the issue of, well, the person doesn't want coaching. Does that mean they don't understand what coaching is, or they don't think there's a problem? And that then led back to the owner. Does the owner understand whether there really is a problem? It may not be a problem, it may be a misunderstanding by the owner. So a lot of questions and finding things out was a key part of what we were talking about.
Yes. And thank you. All great points, both of you. Any other additional from your group? What were the key points? Anybody else want to jump in with their group's key points? Okay.
Well, I could speak for our group. We talked about the contracting process. Who was the contracting process started with? Who's involved? Do we have the right parties to make sure that we understand what the scope of the project was? We also talked about, do you focus on the individual, the kind of East Coast bad manager, or, it's a small organization of 20 people, do we look at like a company transformation, focus on good values and getting to know each other and, learn what each brings to the table. And we also talked about the specialness of family business. Yeah. And I think Michael, you had said the same thing, like what was the, yes, who are these 2 people that are supposed to be taking over, and what is the real intention of the owner, and what's their perspective? Like, do they, what is really going on in the head of the owner if they are to pass the family business down to these 2 individuals?
That's a funny question. What is going on in the head of the owner?
I didn't say this in the group, but was this a Succession? I mean, come on. Succession? the HBO show? King Lear and
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Yes. So was there anybody else who wanted to add anything? Jonathan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, if the bad manager was left out of the contracting process, then one solution is to tell the owner, we have to redo the contracting process. You can't leave a critical player out of the process. They're rejecting coaching may simply be they're rejecting a bad dynamic, a dynamic in which the West Coast manager and the owner did the contracting behind the back of the East Coast manager. Surprise, they don't want to be coached. And then find out who, well, you would have known who were members of the family and who weren't.
Right.
So can you reveal whether the East and West Coast managers were members of the family?
Okay, so thank you for that. It's set up. And if you want to,
I'm asking that because
well, it's not a simple, none of these are simple answers. Unfortunately, it's very complex. So even though there were so few people under 20, it was a very complex relationships in every sense of the word. So what ended up, okay, first of all, the West Coast person is the person who brought me into the project. I was not brought in by the owner and founder of the company, but when the owner and founder was, when we met, the owner and founder was excited about the possibility of getting harmony in the company and wanted me to wave a magic wand, not do any work, but have me fix it. Literally, just go fix it. Go here, I'll throw this project at you, make it better so that I can go back onto the golf course. Not in a rude way. I just meant, that wasn't the goal for the owner, was to delegate. So the challenge with that is each one of the managers, East Coast and West Coast, has been in the company for over 20 years. And the owner viewed them as family members. They, as far as I know, and I'm being cagey about this, I stayed away from any sticky relationship histories that I did not need to know about. But they were treated, on some level, they were treated as family. And the owner's daughter also worked for the company, even though the daughter was told very specifically that when the owner was to retire, which would be pretty much when he dies, because he wasn't going to give it up beforehand, the company would go to these two people. And the daughter was not mentioned in those two, which was another interesting element of the story. So first thing that we did was create two divisions, East Coast, West Coast, because that did not exist prior to working with them, and created a structure so that there were two teams, East Coast and West Coast, that would also overlap on some functions. One of the primary functions where they overlapped was led by the daughter. She was promoted to be a supervisor with a matrix reporting relationship to East Coast and West Coast. We implemented regularly scheduled team meetings so that all the projects were aligned and everybody knew who was working on what. And there were additional resources hired, which was an interesting piece of it because the turnover was outrageous. And, part of that is just COVID. Everybody is the great resignation and all. We implemented a performance management system. I met with we did workshops on performance management, on meeting management, on time management. I continued to coach the West Coast manager for about a year. And the East Coast manager was continuing to produce, as they all produced a lot. They have a specialty product and they did produce a lot. So that was never an issue. But because of that, the owner was not interested in holding anybody's feet to the fire, so long as he didn't have to hear about the problems, which was also interesting. But the West Coast did so well that when the owner came out to be a part of a project that was going on the West Coast, his comments were, "Oh my goodness, you pulled this off seamlessly. It was flawless. And everybody was communicating with everybody. There was great surprise on the part of the owner." And he said, "Was this because of your work with Marcy?" And the West Coast manager thankfully said, "Yes." Like, hello, we want East Coast to jump in. And he was grateful and he showed his appreciation, but was not about to hold East Coast feet to the fire. That just wasn't a part of his MO. Anyway, and then the other main thing that was done in this project was to create boundaries around work days on and work days off. That was a big issue. And I have a feeling that many companies around the country, if not around the world, experienced that because of COVID. So those are the highlights. And my question to you now is, what takeaways do you have that if you were working with a company, whether it's a large corporate or small family, would you remember to include, and what lessons will you take away? And do we want to do this at the end, Stacey, or did you want to do this after each scenario? This is good now? You're on mute.
Let's do it at the end. Just
do it at the end. Okay, so hold off.
Time.
Yeah, hold off on all that. All right, so that was scenario number 1.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
Scenario number 2, Dr. Scott Weimer.
Okay, this is a case, it's actually two separate cases of executive coaching within the same company. The company is one of the largest high-tech companies. I coached two different leaders. One is called Rob and one is called Robbie. One of them was one of the most successful coaching engagements I've ever had in my career. And the other one was one of the least successful coaching engagements I've ever had in my career. So let me start by sharing some of the similarities. Both of them have leadership roles. Both are in their mid-50s, married with 2 kids. Both are successful and they're valued highly by the company. In each case, they have a combination of supporters and detractors. Some people think very highly of each one, and some people think very poorly of each one. In both cases, people complained about them to HR, especially women. And another similarity they have is both have little tolerance for low performers, and they can treat them very harshly. So those are the similarities. And now a little bit more about Rob. Rob is American. He's from the East Coast, and he attended one of the top engineering schools. He is considered brilliant. He's also considered arrogant and extremely competitive. On the positive side, some people refer to him as refreshingly apolitical. This is a rather political organization at the very highest levels. And he doesn't seem to be positioning himself. He just works for the good of the organization. And so some people notice and appreciate that. He has a habit of blurting out whatever he thinks. If he thinks somebody's ideas are stupid, he just says that, and he doesn't discriminate. He says that to people below him and even people at his level or above. He has a habit of intruding into other people's areas of responsibility and telling them what they should be doing. He's known to express his views with extreme confidence, even when he doesn't know much about what he's talking about. And some people resent that greatly because there are some who take his views very seriously, and that's led to very, very costly mistakes in the business. Also, he can grill people in meetings. He asks very sharp, intimidating questions, and often people at a junior level, are utterly devastated and humiliated when they're the subject of this. This was a 6-month coaching engagement. The coaching sessions generally were limited to 15 to 30 minutes. His boss was actively involved, but not in the most constructive way. His recommendations were sometimes distracting and sometimes just off base and counterproductive. So that's Rob. Robbie is from South Asia. He also attended one of the top engineering schools, and he's been in the United States over 30 years. He's an incredibly hard worker. He puts in ridiculously long hours. One person was quoted as saying that Robbie is the most dedicated person he's ever known in his life. Robbie can lose his temper and be very rude and disrespectful. Some find him friendly and warm-hearted. Others find him cold and uncaring. And some say he can be a little bit inappropriate interpersonally, and he can ask intrusive questions, or be a little bit more familiar than is most people prefer. He ignores people he has little respect for, and for those people on his team, he just doesn't provide basic support and direction. This was also a 6-month coaching engagement. This one got extended an extra 3 months. Sometimes when he got overloaded, he would just miss a coaching session. but when he did attend the sessions, they would typically last a full hour. He is very interested in leadership and management issues, and he would constantly ask me for, the best articles or websites on different issues, and he would love to discuss them. His boss is hands-off. He supports the coaching, but he personally isn't actively involved. So with that information that you have, Stacy, can you launch a poll, and from the limited information I just provided, take a guess which was the more successful engagement?
So I'd like you to type your answer in the chat box, but don't press enter so that we can do it all at the same time. So type which one you thought was more successful. Rob, that's the first person that Scott described, or Robbie, that's the second person that Scott described. Type Rob or Robbie in the chat box, and when I count to 3, press enter. 1, 2, 3.
There were slightly more votes for Robbie, but a good number also voted for Rob. So before
Really mixed, yeah.
So it's
Really
pretty
mixed.
Yeah. So before I reveal more of the details and say which one was more successful, I thought this would be a good point to get into breakout rooms and do 2 things. One is come up with whatever questions you'd like to ask about this case or these 2 cases. And 2, discuss which one you think was the more successful one and why you chose either Rob or Robbie.
Scott,
Yes?
did you disclose what the expectations were from the hiring client?
The expectations were actually fairly similar. They were to reduce the number of negative complaints that each was getting, and to just improve their leadership skills. So the expectations were pretty similar.
All right, your assignment is in the chat box. In the breakout rooms, create the questions that you want answered and why you chose Rob or Robbie. If you don't already know each other, introduce yourselves as you start your breakout conversations.
Well, just see, we had a number of questions. I guess I can go through them, but we're not going to have time to get into all of them. But one was, what was the difference in the time? You said there were 2 different time frames for coaching. I think one, Rob, only had sometimes 15 minutes, and
Right.
how did that impact it? That was our first question.
Okay.
Do you want to answer these as we go?
No,
or what do you
go,
just give the
list all your
questions?
questions.
Okay. And then the one where the boss was involved, but it could be distracting or counterproductive. How did that affect the coaching versus the boss that was more hands-off or non-involved?
Okay.
Did they both, Rob and Robbie, did they engage? Did they seem like they were engaged when you coached them, or did you observe resistance? What else? And the descriptors about the sentences you gave us on each of them, were those from you, like a summary, or did that come from interviewing coworkers?
Okay. Let me answer your first and last question. I'll save the other 2 for later.
Okay.
The descriptors, those were, I did 360 feedback interviews in both cases, interviewed about 6 to 8 people. And those were common threads. And how did the 15 to 30 minutes impact the coaching? It didn't. Rob was very efficient and businesslike. And once he was done with whatever he was concerned with, he didn't want to stick around and talk more.
Okay.
Robbie, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy the conversations more, and so he had more to talk about.
Okay.
So which, did you guys think it was Rob or Robbie that was the successful one?
We were split. I said Robbie because I thought since he was interested in management and OD leadership articles, he might be more open. You could like guide him with that. But then we also had an opinion that, well, maybe he was a know-it-all and maybe Rob would have been. So we were split on the decision.
All right, let's hear from another group. Jonathan, who is in your group?
Aminata, Renee, and Marcy.
Okay, would one of you like to summarize?
Can I volunteer Jonathan? Because he always ends up with a grocery list that's like, why didn't I think of that? Like he has these bullet points. So I'm volunteering Jonathan.
All right. Thank you. And then also, Aminata, was it you who was speaking last? Or was, because I don't want to miss what you were about to say when you got cut off by the bell.
I think it was Renee. I don't think I
Oh,
was.
Renee.
It
Yeah.
was me, and it was nothing. I said I was flooded with details I was trying to process still. So,
Yeah.
but I
okay.
appreciate it.
So what the things I would want to know are who contracted them, what was their willingness to be coached up front, what sort of relationship did they have with you as a coach, what was the quality of that relationship, what was their level of motivation to change or precursors to motivation for change. Like, you know, I assumed that you gave us Rob because he just sounds like somebody who's really destructive and could be causing some big problems for people. The question I have—
Let me interrupt you right there. He was very destructive. He did cause big problems for people. And I don't think that was his intention.
So my question was going to be, the reason I chose him was because I assumed that we were giving him for a purpose, because he seems like the feedback on him seems so bad that we would think he's uncoachable. So the key question is, when presented with these are the destructive effects, did he go, oh my God, that's not what I want? In other words, was he aware of the destructive effects and really wanted to stop doing the destructive effects? Or when he heard about the destructive effects, did he say, oh my gosh, I want to change?
Okay, Jonathan, we'll skip that question to the end so we can hear from the other groups first.
Yeah.
But your question about the contracting, in each case, they reached out to me. And it was because they'd had complaints and they were told you need to get coaching.
Mm.
So let's go to another group. Jocelyn, who is in your group?
Let's see, we had Michael. Sorry, looking at the names here. Daniel. Most of us chose Robbie, but we believe that you've thrown us a curveball. So I'm with Jonathan, and that, you know, maybe on a very superficial level, oh yes, of course, she's uncoachable. It's Robbie. But Annette here, Annette's a little, you know, she knows you, Scott. She's like, she was not just gonna you know, she was gonna dig a little bit deeper. And so there was reading between the lines of understanding of, you know, why was a contract extended? You know, whose kind of choice was that? You know, the duration, you know, the lack of involvement from the manager.
The quick answer to that is, why was it extended? Because he wanted to get more benefit from it, and he went to his boss, and the boss said, yeah, fine.
Okay. And our burning question that we left with, we didn't actually prepare questions until like 10 seconds before the end. But our burning question was, oh my God, it just slipped my head. It was, what was it, Michael?
Well, my burning question, and Scott, you alluded to this at the end, that the effect of the HR complaints and how formal those were. In my experience, when there's a complaint in the pipeline, it always directly affects the coaching, because there may be boundaries of what you as a coach have access to or where the situation is. So that was what my burning question about the effect of this HR complaints.
Well, let me answer that. With the complaints were a little more formal with Rob. He could be brutal. And there was one woman who felt very harassed. And so she made a formal complaint. They did an investigation. They said this doesn't rise to the level where any discipline needs to happen. However, he could benefit from coaching, so we strongly recommend coaching.
So the complaints were resolved. So they weren't in process while you were coaching. Coaching was a recommendation.
Correct.
Do that. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the last group.
Betty or Renee, you want to take it?
I'm gonna claim this is my very first meeting.
Okay.
I'm just taking it in.
Sure. Renee Rubin.
I don't think I have anything to add that hasn't already been said. I do think that it was most likely a trick question, and it is Rob, although I voted Robbie, but just based on the way this is all set up.
Well, let me go back to the question. I think it was Jonathan's question about motivation. What was the level of motivation for each person and how did it play out? Rob was basically skeptical at first, but open-minded. And what I did was I collected 360 feedback. I did in-depth personal interviews. I summarized them. I wrote it up in a succinct 1.5-page report. I gave it to Rob, and it was a very direct, hard-hitting report, which said people consider you utterly brilliant. They appreciate that you're not political and you have the best interests of the company at heart, and they see you as extremely competitive. You try to prove you're the smartest person in the room. You ask people very pointed questions and put them on the spot, and you can humiliate people and be very degrading to people, and you can do this privately or in a group. And here's the effect of that. So that's the essence of his report. When he read that, he said, this is the best 360 feedback I've ever gotten. He said, this has a lot of rich detail. And he said, I didn't realize people realized how smart I am. I don't have to keep proving it. He said, check. So, and then we dug into, he wanted to understand more about his specific behaviors that he was doing and what alternatives there were. And we spent the next 6 months basically working on focusing on those behaviors and him actively trying to change them. Knowing when to grill people and when not to, and the difference between criticizing people publicly and privately, and some of his assumptions he made about people, and that he viewed intelligence as traditional linear engineering intelligence, and he didn't realize, or he didn't fully appreciate, that there were other types of intelligence, like interpersonal intelligence, and he tried to value that more. And he would come back, and in a session, he would say, you know, I was trying to do these things, but I blew it. I just exploded at someone in a meeting. You know, what should I do? And so I'd provide encouragement, and I'd say, well, you know, in the process of change, you don't change all at once. The first step is being aware of the behavior, and you sometimes catch yourself after the fact. And then the more experience you have with this, you'll catch yourself as you're doing it. And then when you have even more experience, you'll catch yourself before you do those behaviors. And then we would problem solve, what should he do to undo some of the, you know, the negative impacts. would it make sense to go back to a person or apologize? And he seemed to take it very seriously. And at one point, he was really proud of himself. He said, you know, Scott, I implemented your suggestions and I had a successful meeting. He said, this was with the CEO and a few other top people. He said, in the past, I would have expressed my opinions very strongly. I would have expressed them first. And as you say, they would have been so pissed off at me that they wouldn't have considered what I had to say. But this time I waited, I listened to everybody else. I asked questions, and then I threw out my idea and they accepted it. And this saved the company $500 million. And he said, so this isn't just some feel-good thing about, you know, I can feel good about myself with the coaching. There's an actual business result. So his motivation, I think, was to be the best leader he could be and to do the best for the business. I think with Robbie, his motivation was, I don't want to use the word defensive, but it was more self-protective, that he realized he was doing things that he shouldn't do. Some of those things he could correct, and some of them he just couldn't or wouldn't correct. He just didn't have the skill or the motivation to make certain changes. And by being, you asked about resistance, I actually think his interest in leadership and management articles was a form of resistance, in part. In part, it was genuine interest. In part, it was, rather than deal with difficult problems I'm having right now, I'd like to keep it a little more abstract, and let's have these intellectual discussions about communication and assertiveness and delegation. And the best one, by the way, the one that seemed to have the greatest impact on him, and he passed this article to his direct reports, was about boundaries. Because, as I mentioned, he was an extreme workaholic. He would, during the pandemic, he said he would get up at 7 in the morning, go straight to work. He would take a half hour for lunch, a half hour for dinner, and he'd stop at 12 midnight. And if somebody had an urgent need, he would stay up beyond 12 midnight. And he just couldn't or wouldn't say no to people. So I gave him an article about setting boundaries, and he really appreciated that. And he gave it to his staff because he wanted them to set boundaries too, but he was unwilling or unable to actually set boundaries. So that's what happened with him. Any reactions or further questions?
Well, I have actually an observation. I hear this with a lot of clients, and I'm hearing it from you, Scott, about the boundaries issue during COVID. And just doesn't have to be for this evening, but even for future discussion, how we as a country will get past the boundaries issue that was created from working from home, because I think there's some value to hybrid work setup, but we haven't quite unlocked how to do that effectively and psychologically safely yet. So just wanted to put that out there.
Let me make 2 comments. One is about COVID and boundaries. What Robbie described was the expectations were you're just working all the time, and someone could email him at 10 at night and he was expected to handle something. And so this was it's a workaholic organizational culture, and someone who doesn't have firm boundaries can easily be swallowed up in that. Now, with him, I believe this was a problem way before the pandemic. May have been exacerbated a bit due to the pandemic, but he was someone who just couldn't say no. And he really, really wanted to please. And as a result, he got overwhelmed and he wouldn't have time for people and he would ignore important things. And he would lose his temper and snap at people. And it wasn't because he was mean, it was just because he was stretched to his limit and he didn't know how to cope with all that he was facing. But I think you're raising a very important point about work culture in many organizations, especially during the pandemic, and that it's not really conducive to setting boundaries and having a balanced life. And that's something that I think really has to be addressed. Any other thoughts or questions about these two cases?
Yeah. What did you learn from working on these two cases?
Let me give you one learning and also a very juicy, difficult moment. The learning has to do with the limits of what I can accomplish. With Rob, his transformation was so extreme that when we met with his boss, a very disturbing and curious thing happened. Rob was describing how he's learned not to question people sharply in meetings and not to humiliate people and to be more diplomatic, but not to lose his edge, but to be less of an aggressive, menacing person in meetings who puts people on the spot. And as he described that, his boss said, "No, this is not good. You should still do that." And I said, "Why are you saying that?" And he said, "Well," he said, "imagine two dogs." He said, "One dog barks and intimidates others. The other dog slinks off to the corner and pisses on the carpet." And he turns to Rob and he says, "Rob, I want you to be the dog that barks." Well, I tried to reason with him a little, and that was utterly useless. And I just realized there is a real limit to what I can do. So after that meeting, I had a talk with Rob, and he said, yeah, he was puzzled and disturbed by how his boss reacted, but that was just out of my control.
Interesting. It sounds like a family dynamic or a group dynamic sort of situation where the boss's belief system may have been part of what was behind the scenes holding Rob's behavior in place.
Yes, yes.
And even if Rob wasn't conscious of being rewarded for it, he may have seen cues that unconsciously promoted his doing more and more of these awful behaviors.
Yeah, I think most behavior is overdetermined. And we were talking earlier about his own insecurities and how he wanted to prove how smart he was, and he was disgusted with people who were lazy and didn't step up and do their homework and prepare themselves. But there's also what you're saying, that there were aspects of the team he was on and the leadership of the organization that saw some value in what he was doing. And like maybe they'd rather him be the dog that barks rather than they. So I find in organizations often when somebody is behaving badly, there are some other people who benefit from watching that person behave badly. And that if that person corrects their behavior, then they may not necessarily like that.
I'm curious, with Robbie, did you discover more leverage points where his desires, the what's in it for me, could be, the energy coming from those could be exploited to move him forward in a better direction?
I don't have an easy answer to that. I think there were some relatively easy fixes. Like when he would lose his temper and snap at people, I think just awareness of that helped him curb that behavior. But things like time management and being overwhelmed and setting boundaries, he was unable to, those were such deeply embedded behavior patterns. He just couldn't or wouldn't change those.
Mhm.
Last question, is that, where's any more, Scott? I would like to give a 5-minute bio break.
Let's go for a 5-minute bio break.
Okay, we're gonna have a 5-minute bio break. Let me give you something to, whoops.
Then we're gonna come back for another scenario.
We have, that's a nice. We have one more scenario. It's very simple, and we're very curious to know what you would do in response to this situation. So Marcy, tell us
Okay.
what you found yourself in.
This one's a juicy one, folks. This one's a doozy. So here's the structure. There's a manager who has supervisors reporting to him. One of the supervisors was in the manager's office, a new, relatively new-ish employee, and accidentally hit the record button in a text of a group text of the leadership of the department, meaning the manager and the supervisors, while the manager was complaining about the team and accidentally hit send. What would you do?
That's a lot of accidents.
Well, so this is my question too. Was it really an accident? So the supervisor insists that she, really a big oops, insists that she's not tech savvy and it was an accident. Okay, and everybody is saying, okay. I mean, you know, it's so interesting. The issue really focused on the manager, but what would you do?
Questions before you go into your breakout rooms.
You're the consultant here. You're the coach, the OD consultant and coach.
Was there any legal content like
No, good question.
complaint? Okay.
No, they were just pardon the
Complaints.
expression, bitching and moaning.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Just wasn't sure if there was like legal action there. So
No. That's a good question. No, yeah.
Just
How did
to
people take
recap,
it?
RC, so manager is in with the supervisor in the office. The manager is grousing about upset, right? That supervisor actually not only presses record and records it, but actually hits the send and it sends to the group.
Yes.
So what was
How
the
far
consult?
into the complaining did the supervisor hit record?
Oh, I don't know, but that's a good question. I don't know. I just know that in my, I don't know when that's, I don't know. The answer is I don't know the answer to that.
And another question would be, did you enter the organization? Did you already have a relationship with this organization, or were you called in after this incident?
I have a relationship with the larger organization, and I was called in after this incident. And even further, let's see how recently, I think it happened within 3 months. So I was called in within 3 months after this happened.
And what was your contract? What was the outcome that they were looking for? Put the team back together again? Or?
Yeah. Yes. The message is we've got to make this team work.
Even though managers are behaving badly. That's it. All right. Any other questions? You ready to go into breakouts?
What effects happened after the message was received? How did people take it?
They were not happy.
How did they respond to the manager?
I think each person responded in their own special way.
No, how did they respond to the manager?
Each individual responded differently. Do you want a list of, for example, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Jonathan, are you asking how did the organization handle
No, the
manager?
individuals on the team.
They were
how did
angry.
they respond?
They were
Obviously, they responded differently, but what was the
anger.
response?
Anger was the theme.
Ah,
Anger was the theme. Yes.
Okay.
anger at the manager or anger
Yes.
at the supervisor or both?
At the manager.
Ah, okay.
Yes, this is an HR nightmare.
I was wondering okay, so if it was a group text of all the leaders and this, voicemail goes out or voice note goes out to everybody, were they, the thought that Jonathan had me thinking of was like, were they responding via the group text? So I don't know, I guess I think of Twitter when something gets posted and all these people are reacting to it. Did they kind of spiral in the group text or did somebody shut that down?
I think they immediately removed it, but that was after people had seen it or heard it. So somehow they were able to remove it. And I know that, for example, they were told things like they were on the phone to each other saying, did you just see this text that we got? And by the way, it was a small-ish group, even though it was a leadership group. It was probably 6 people maximum. Yes, they were angry at the manager.
What would you do?
What would you do? Have fun with this one. It's a juicy one.
Okay. What would you do? Who would you fire?
Oh, my.
Hire Marcy. God bless you, Joe. Yes.
Hire Marcy. That's what we would do.
I mean, I was saying with the kind of, I'll use the word incredulous, that something held on for 3 months, or that this outburst could have been used, and whether you used it as the kind of the popping of the pus that was underneath to figure out what's the real content. And aside from this fellow, did he apologize like the next day? I mean, we got to start there, right? I mean, but you came in 3 months later, right?
Okay, so
I'm just trying to understand
yeah. So that's actually part of what I did. So anybody else have any comments on what they would do? That's a good point. It's a good point. Jonathan, yeah.
So I would want to review the content of the message for the extent to which it's personal attacks versus useful feedback. And then interview each person, because there's only 6 of them. What did they value in a team? What values did the manager break? And what would you like to see different on this team? And then figure out more questions in those interviews to figure out whether facilitating what Jocelyn called a talking stick conversation to clear the air. Now, the clearing the air could be done in a couple of ways. Either way, it has to be a safe space conversation. One possible direction is, let's talk about it. Another possible direction is, especially if the content of what the manager said is really stuff that they should have felt safe saying to the team, would be to have the manager say, I apologize, I said it terribly. I so thank you all for giving this opportunity for Groundhog Day, and have the manager just restate in ways that fit the values of the other people what the manager intended for them to receive. And then maybe that will have cleared the air. It's also possible that the manager may have felt uncomfortable saying it to the group, in which case part of the safe space conversation would be to reconstruct the operating agreements among the teams so that they can be safe saying it. So those were the things. And Jocelyn, do you want to say more about your talking stick ideas?
Well, just to, I guess, clearly the manager had things they wanted to say. I mean, maybe it wasn't, you know, that we don't know if it's, has it been said before or like to the, you know, were they reiterating things they already thought, but like just giving people the moment to be heard, be acknowledged, and just hearing the different perspectives. So I guess one, just kind of letting it all out, and then, you know, not just in one session, but I think I would think multiple sessions where you can let it out, and then, you know, what kind of working group do we want to have? Like, we should be able to have a place where people can bring the differing perspectives and not necessarily agree on everything. You know, we all don't necessarily agree on things and have to love it, but we have to live by it. So there's definitely some lack of respect going on, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At least recreate the agreements on how they operate.
Yes.
And how they deal with their disagreements about content or each other.
Yeah.
All right.
Given, Marcy, that we're close to 8 o'clock, would you like to tell us what you did?
Thanks, Stacy. Yes, sure. I'll sum it up real quickly. So working with the team as a team, it was too raw. I could not get all of them in the same room at the same time at that moment. But I did talk to the manager about going back again. Oh, I should. All right. So apparently in thinking about this, as you were asking questions, I was remembering HR was supposedly called in, but they said they don't remember having any consequence of that. They just were told, don't talk about this anymore. So everybody was shut down. That's when then they brought
Who
me.
was told?
The people in the text were told, don't talk about it. Yet a higher person who said HR is being brought in, so we don't want you talking about it anymore. So then now fast forward 3 months, they bring me in, and everybody brings it up because there's still a trust issue in the group. So the first thing was to go back to the manager and say, you need to meet with each person individually and apologize. And he said, but I already did. I said, clearly they're not getting the message based on I interviewed each one of the people on the team to find out what was going on. And so he went back, and one of the complaints that I heard sort of offline was, it sounded like he was reading from a script. I said, he was. I gave him a script. Because we needed him to say things like, I am so sorry. And I told him, you need to say, I was very prescriptive, which I'm not usually, but in this case, I said, they need to hear that about 4 times from you because the message isn't getting through how awful you feel about what happened. And I am now actually and then I went back and met individually with him and each of the partners, each pair individually, to make sure that they're actually on the same page. And the one that he complained about, her comments were, we are very direct with each other now. We know what the issues are, and we may not agree, but we are having open communication, which is just fascinating. I am in the process of facilitating those conversations. And when we get through everybody in the group one-on-one, then I'm sort of taking the pulse as we go along. That's when we're going to get together as a group. But I could not put them all in the same room at the same time until I was certain that everybody was saying, yep, I am committed to this team and interested in making it work. I didn't know where they were. And they are actually surprisingly open to saying, yes, we want to make it work, because he did go back and apologize to each one of them at length 4 times. I'm so sorry. I am really so sorry. I'm sorry. I even had him tell me and remind them what you're sorry for. which he did. He said, I will not be talking about other colleagues with other, I won't be gossiping like that again.
Certainly when the
Marcy,
supervisor's in the room.
Right, exactly. I'm sorry.
did I understand correct that it was, so the manager was talking with their manager, but it was,
one of the supervisors that reports to him.
oh,
President
okay.
reports to him. And I
So,
think
but-
that it was part of the onboarding. He was just saying, and here's some things you might run into, and so-and-so's not so great at doing it. And, and it was like, oh my gosh. Right.
Oh, okay, so it was the manager that was
Talking to one of the
complaining
supervisors.
to a
Yes.
subordinate. The
Yes.
manager is the one that recorded themselves.
Nope. The supervisor listening
The subordinate.
accidentally.
Oh.
Yes.
But
But
so did the supervisor apologize too? Was there any backlash to the supervisor for the accidental recording? And
yes, and a lot of arguments that she didn't really know technology and she did it by accident. But when we went through this, I think Stacy and I were saying, like, how do you do that by accident? Like, even try to do it intentionally. You have to, it's like it takes a lot of effort to record in a text. I don't know if you've recorded a text before.
Yeah.
But you actually have to like press and wait
holds, yep.
and then press again. It was not an easy thing to do by accident. It was not an easy thing to do intentionally, let alone by accident.
It was an easy thing to do surreptitious or surreptitiously to make it for the good of the group. Eventually, it was a wonderful moment.
It was quite a moment. She was new though, so I don't know. She didn't have any grudge against him. I think it really was, on some level, a mistake. Only I don't understand it.
What a way to be welcome to the team.
Right?
That's really hard to come in.
Case study for you. Yeah. If you have any other insights or things that you would do, I would be open to hearing your thoughts. So thank you.
I'm gonna, if you'll stick around, Marcy, after we wrap up, if people want to continue to engage with you, and Scott,
Sure.
the same.
Sure.
If people want to continue. So thank you, Marcy and Scott,
Thank
for
you.
presenting your cases. Thank you, Annette, for helping plan this evening. And before you dash, I just put a link in the chat box to a survey. We want to capture your feedback before we wrap up. Will you take 2 minutes to complete? Well, it won't even take 2 minutes. Take 1 minute to complete that survey.
And thank you, Stacy, for organizing and managing this.
Thank you, Stacy.
You're most welcome.